Welcome to the House of A-Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me today will be Derek. Hello. And Sean.
Hello.
And on this episode, we'll be discussing Pet Sematary, the 2019 remake of the Stephen King classic, because it's a movie that has a lot of fandom around it and a book that has a lot of fandom around it, even though Stephen King initially didn't want to release that as a book, because I think he had written it because they lived in a house that was next to a freeway with a bunch of cars driving by. And they had like a scare with their kid, and there was a pet cemetery nearby, so he wrote that book and thought it was like too bleak, and then ended up just releasing it to the publisher to like satisfy a book deal he had or something. Mm-hmm. And then now it's like a cultural, touchstone for a lot of people, and it's a movie that a lot of people have a lot of love for. So it's this remake that's been talked about a lot.
He thought it was too bleak, like Stephen King. And it's like, well, he made a bunch of books that are bleaker and worse.
Yeah.
But
so we're discussing the 2019 remake, and we'll start out discussing that without spoilers. That's one, too, where if you haven't...
Yeah, there can be spoilers even if you've seen the original.
Yeah, because I would just say if you're interested in seeing it and you haven't watched the trailer yet, then don't. Yeah. Don't watch the trailer. Go in fresh. Although if you are a horror fan that was interested in the movie whatsoever, you've probably already seen people sharing what some of the changes were.
I skipped that second trailer and I didn't know what the changes were.
Okay.
So I went in. It was like, oh, cool. Like I knew things were different, but I didn't know. I wasn't for sure because I saw people say, "Hey, I think that second trailer may have spoiled too much before the film came out."
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't really remember anything like that I saw that changed anything from what I remembered. So I think I just missed out on those later marketing pushes, which I was glad.
Yeah, I didn't see any of the second trailer, but I was just on Facebook yesterday, and I guess somebody had watched it. Those are my friends. Yeah. And then right in the thing before, it was like no spoiler warning or anything. It was just right there. I was like, why would you not?
Oh my gosh.
Actually, it was Friday night. So it's like you just watched the movie at like, it was I guess because they posted it at 9 o'clock. And
was it William?
No, but it's like you would think you would at least like have the decency to be like, oh, spoilers, and then put it down, but just right there, and it's like I wasn't even trying to read it. I was just going through and I was like, son of a bitch. So like one of the big crucial parts that's different I've read before I got to watch it.
Well, I had seen the trailer that showed that because I saw everyone complaining about it, and then I saw the trailer, like I guess it's just the part where that was revealed, and I was like, oh, so they changed that. They changed this, they changed that, they changed this. Not going to be clear on what it was because... Yeah, it's just if you've seen the original movie,
yeah.
But yeah, so we'll be discussing that. And I don't like in terms of other stuff. Oh, the only brief bit of news I think it'd be fun to mention is Mark Hamill is going to be the voice of Chucky for the Child's Play reboot,
which he's done that before.
Because he had done that for Robot Chicken. He had voiced Chucky for a skit, and it's funny because after all that news broke, somebody mentioned him, and he's like, "Oh, I did that? I forgot."
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. So that was never in conversation about the Robot Chicken thing, I guess?
No, I mean, it was probably
wild.
It was probably something, too, because he does a lot of voice work for, television, video games, whatever.
It would just be, well, I just mean, I'm not surprised that he forgot it, but in the production of this new Chucky, somebody didn't bring up, hey, somebody didn't say, we remember you doing Chucky, or we looked at your IMDb and saw you did Chucky before. You know what I mean? No, that conversation never popped up through all this.
Well, I wonder, too, there's just such an obscure bit that it could have, sometimes you get uncredited.
No, yeah, for sure.
So it might have just been a really obscure thing.
Well, and two, it could have very much been they didn't even think about anything to that extent. They just said he was in Star Wars, so he's a big name. He's done all the voice work, for a lot of the Joker stuff, because he had been in the Arkham games voicing the Joker, at least the first two. And then, other TV things.
Well, also, too, the original Batman animated series.
Yeah, the Batman. I'm just saying, in terms of, recent things that
I know, the 3 Chucky fans that exist in the world were, shitting their pants because...
there's more than that.
There's, the 7 that...
Well, without going...
No, it's just funny that, they freaked out about it, but then I wonder now you have Mark Hamill if they're like, oh, okay, that's...
Well, even...
everybody's just upset because they think they did...
Don Mancini a disservice.
Yes, just
because they have the ongoing of Chucky series, because they had Cult of Chucky, and they're having the TV series that's going to be coming up soon. So people thought they were just kind of cutting him off at the knees a little bit to relaunch Child's Play as a brand, because apparently they have the movie rights to Child's Play, the first film. So that's what they're rebooting it as. Yeah. And then the TV series will still continue. Like I haven't
which is
seen,
based on the original timeline that he's still been
Brand
going
Dourif
with
voicing it
and making these films. That it does have a following because they keep he keeps making them like every couple years.
I just don't know, like when they do these remakes, not to get big thing, just why they can't sometimes just get new people, and that's a big deal because you like as much as like you want people.
I think the only thing is it's not the same thing, but it's almost like if they would have rebooted, Evil Dead and said, Sam Raimi, you can't touch this. Bruce Campbell, you can't touch. You know what I mean? Like that's the same thing where the fans are like, "What are you doing?" Like we like the creator of this. Like it's.
And Don
I think it's that
Mancini,
thing,
the way that
sure.
he had talked, it sounds like they tried to get their approval and sign off on the reboot, and they just didn't grant it because, we're not involved with this. We're not putting our name on it. But even Tom Holland, after the announcement came out, so the director of the original Child's Play film,
Spider-Man.
Yeah, not the Spider-Man Tom Holland, the writer-director Tom Holland.
The lesser-known Tom Holland.
So after they had announced the news about Mark Hamill being cast as the voice of Chucky, he retweeted it and said, "Good move" or something. So I think everybody can recognize, even if you don't like the idea of the reboot, getting Mark Hamill to voice the character does pique more interest in it.
It makes it makes it like, okay, because it'd be different, like
because you wouldn't think at this point in his career he would be doing just a cash grab for something that he had seen footage from and thought looked terrible. You wouldn't think at this point he would need to do that.
I don't know.
And I thought the trailer looked pretty good.
I had to see it, but it's like I don't know. I do think it makes it a lot. It makes me more likely to see it because you have Aubrey Plaza in it and Mark Hamill doing a voice, so it's like, okay.
It would be very interesting seeing Aubrey Plaza play a mother character.
Mother.
Because I just seen her like on Legion recently and so much of her Parks and Rec run. Even though they spoiler alert, had a kid at the very end of the show or something, it just didn't seem like she was.
Is ruining that series for somebody who's just going to start it now.
Well, I don't think that's a big spoiler. But yeah, so that was a bit of news that I at least thought was noteworthy just because Mark Hamill is such a huge icon at this point and has been involved in so many projects. Him being
another
involved.
reboot of an 80s horror film.
It's cool that he's gonna be doing it.
Yeah. So also real
when does
quick,
that come out? Is it this summer, right?
Yes. Let's see. It comes out. I wouldn't think that it's interesting that they announced that he was the voice because I guess voiceover doesn't take too long. It's June 21st, 2019, so a couple months.
My thing was I know it's the whole thing now is like a rogue programmer, changes the AI. Yeah. I think the one, originally we talked about, why are they changing that? And
the Voodoo Curse is a specific story element that probably doesn't play as well in some sectors now as it used to.
Yeah, but anyway. From the trailer, I was like, okay, one interesting angle they could make, and I could see why Don Mancini would be maybe against this, just because it goes against the spirit of like the single Chucky. But like, if it is AI or whatever, if they just make like an army of Chuckies, you know what I mean? Like that could easily be done, and having a bunch of Mark Hamill's voice a bunch of Chuckies, and you know what I mean? Like that's what can make this film different and stand alone and be something interesting. That's like, okay, that's worth seeing what this film would be. Because I would like to see some people fight a bunch of Chuckies and them not being indestructible. You know what I mean? Like if it was like a hive mind AI and they could just tear up a bunch of Chuckies and you know what I mean? Like that would be fun.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and then briefly before we get into the discussion of Pet Sematary, we give a shout out to Sam Dunkley who recently subscribed to our Patreon.
Thank you.
So we always appreciate that. And if you also want to check out our Patreon, we have links to it on our site and such. Maybe we'll share it in the show notes for this too. But
yeah, we really, really appreciate it. It helps out a lot.
Yeah, because a lot of the movies we go out of pocket on, or pretty much all of them. I mean, there's only been like a very small number where anyone sent us like copies of something. Because was it Arrow Video had sent us some at some point?
Yeah, they send us some, but a lot of times it's stuff that's, you know what I mean, just different
more
sort
obscure.
of genres. Yeah. But also too, just alone we have this as an LLC. Just we didn't know if we would hit copyright stuff a long time ago because we were doing a lot more video stuff. I mean, our filing cost and everything was how much, William? Like
I think
$175 for the state.
Yeah, and to file an LLC,
and then pay a tax person.
Yeah.
So that alone, not including monthly fees and all that stuff.
Yeah, because the LLC protects us. If anybody ever comes after us over video stuff, they'll sue that and then take the $0 of assets it has.
Yeah.
Versus suing us personally.
Give me that T-shirt.
Which is like, yeah, if you're a YouTuber and you do a bunch of videos, it's not the worst idea to have some type of corporation set up so that they would sue the corporation and not you personally.
Yeah, and we were doing weekly video content with copyrighted video. You know what I mean? Like, it was in an editorial sense where it was reviews. It wasn't like we were posting up the movies or anything like that.
Yeah, but we had ran into occasional copyright issues and like even had our YouTube page taken down for a day once. And
yeah.
Yeah, so all that. But yes, we always appreciate if anybody contributes to Patreon. We're also, working on other narrative project stuff, so hopefully we'll have more things written at some point soon. But yeah, so now we can move into our discussion of Pet Sematary, the 2019 remake, and the box office. So this isn't going to do it box office numbers
anywhere near it, no.
Because it was didn't it set like a record for R-rated horror debut or whatever. But Pet Sematary is looking at it's going to debut like in the low $20 million range. We're still recording this on Sunday morning before the numbers have came in, so that could change. But so it's looking like it will be profitable and end up making its money back, but it's not going to be a cultural phenomenon on the level of an It and gross $300 million domestic and however much worldwide. Like, it's not going to do those numbers.
And the production budget is being reported from Box Office Mojo is $21 million.
So that's a movie, like, if it goes on to make, like, 60 domestic and 100 worldwide or something, then it would probably be seen as a success.
But you think it would do that, though?
No.
I mean, because it's supernatural stuff, right? This can't be shown in China, right?
Yeah, it depends, but I mean,
right.
like...
Yeah, I don't know exactly the areas there, but
I'm just thinking back to a lot of, like, Blumhouse horror, like Insidious would do, like, 100 million worldwide or something. So if it gets close to, like, those numbers, they'll be fine on it. But, two, it's also coming just a few weeks after Us.
And against Shazam.
Then I'm not sure what all the crossover in market is between Shazam and Pet Sematary, but
it probably doesn't help.
Us and Pet Sematary probably had some crossover market. And then, in the upcoming weeks, they're going to have like Avengers, and like a week or two from now is Hellboy. So there's all these things.
And then the other, was it La Llorona, yeah, which that comes out this month, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
So there's just all this stuff coming out in like a row. So, like I said, we'll hold off on the spoilers for Pet Sematary until towards the end when we say we're going into spoilers. We'll even hold the stuff that's kind of revealed in the trailer that if you haven't seen it, you don't want to catch. So, yeah, the new movie, like the casting on it, I thought was good.
John Lithgow I liked him much better than Herman Munster in the original.
You did.
Fred Gwynn?
Because
so a lot of people...
because I grew up watching John Lithgow in a bunch of stuff.
I did too.
I
love
like
John
Third
Lithgow.
Rock from the Sun, and he was in Shrek, and he was in a bunch of different stuff. So it's like
the classics.
yeah, the classics. But like I just like John Lithgow a lot, So I kind of like
I absolutely love him, but
he came off less creepy to me than Herman Munster did.
Oh no, I think he was more creepy. I think it's because of the way they wrote him. Like, I think that, like him following her in the woods.
Yeah, that was,
and then like, why are you standing by the road? This is a line spoiler. You're scaring the kids. Like, there's just like little things. It's like, and I think the original he felt like he was like our friend of the family more.
He felt to me in the original always kind of remind me more of what's Tool Time, whatever, Home Improvement.
Tim Allen?
No, not Tim Allen. The neighbor that you always just saw his eyes.
Oh, Al?
Yeah,
Wilson.
Yeah. You always kind of remind me of Wilson a little bit, but
yeah. So like,
Tim.
No, I think that like because a lot of complaints about this have been that people didn't feel as much of a connection with John Lithgow's version of Judd as they did with Fred Gwynn's. And I think that part of that is just the way that the characters are presented. So like you said, he does come across as a little bit more somber or creepy, I think, whereas Fred Gwynn was a little bit more aloof seeming kind of in the original. And then like a lot of it too does come out into what your connection to the actor was. Except because Fred Gwynn was Herman Munster.
I mean, I grew up watching him. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, the only thing I will say is that is John Lithgow an American, or is he... Because he doesn't seem like I don't know if he is or not.
He was born in Rochester, New York.
Yeah, so I feel like
he just has a very northern accent, and it almost kind of like nondescript, where you could almost think like he's not.
That's what a lot of actors do, though.
But whereas the other guy in the original, like definitely sound like somebody that lived in that area, and that's the only thing about John Lithgow that kind of threw me off a little bit. Although I did like that version of it better, it's just his accent didn't really seem like somebody who like. I don't know.
Yeah. So for me, the film felt like it was almost just like of course, the original movie was a truncated version of the book, but this almost feels like a Cliff Notes version of that story, where I felt like I knew the story, but like everything seemed to move so fast. Like in the original, they did build a relationship between him and the family, and you did feel like, oh, this is like a neighbor, and they're, they live out here in the country, and they're kind of building a friendship. For this movie, it almost felt like I knew that friendship was supposed to happen, so it was fine, but like I don't think it did enough to kind of build it up. Like even, there are moments when the daughter and him are together alone, and it didn't feel warm. Like it never felt the same kind of
like Judd and Ellie.
Yeah, and I think in the original, it was like he was kind of doing those things because he liked her so much, and he says he likes her in this, but it's like.
Well, he has like kind of a crotchety relationship with people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I think part of it is like, I do like John Lithgow as an actor. So some of that kind of.
I just like him as an actor.
So
I do too.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes that will kind of.
I'm surprised you didn't mention the Twilight Zone movie when you brought him up.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
No, I just like, I just like John Lithgow. So it's like, like sometimes you get actors in roles, or maybe the role, you just like the actor so much. Like, okay.
Yes,
I think it's kind of some of that with this.
Yeah. So
I like Jason Clarke a whole lot too.
Yeah, Jason Clarke was good.
See, I don't really care for him that much.
So like some people, yes, you
didn't see War of the Planet of the Apes, though, did you?
I guess we didn't give a basic synopsis. A family moves from the big city. They relocate to rural Maine with a married couple and their 2 children, and they discover a mysterious burial ground hidden deep in the woods near their new home. Because they moved from the big city where he's a doctor, it's for him to be a physician at a local university, and to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and the long hours, so they can have more time as a family. And then I guess they buy this house like sight unseen, or because they get a lot of property with it too. And then they discover early on that there's a pet cemetery on it where all the local kids bury their pets. And then there's something beyond it that's even different. So, obviously stuff comes back to life.
and also too, if you hear a cat meowing, we do have Church on the podcast, but he will not stay at the mic. So
yeah, I don't know if you'll be able to see this guy that's roaming around.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What did you guys walk out thinking of the movie? We can cut to the chase on that end of it. Before we.
I guess why is what I came out when I left is like why. Like I like with. I know, like, me and my wife kind of, if it's a fair comparison or not, but like I understood. I'm like, oh, okay, I get why they remade it. When I came out watching this, I was like, why did they remake? What was the point of remaking this?
Now,
other than the success of it.
So I see why. I just don't know if it was a success. It wasn't. For me, it wasn't. Only because they made some significant changes. I think the last half of the movie. That's why. Yeah. I think probably if they pitched, they were probably brought this. I'm sure it was producers wanting to get a remake done. This is it's 2 directors, right, William?
Yeah.
Which I always feel like that's weird when they.
I mean, hey, the Russo brothers are the
it works. Dennis
Coen brothers.
Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't.
All right.
William can fix that, and I'll just keep talking. But. So I feel like whatever happened, or maybe they approached a lot of different filmmakers, but they had some sort of different vision for the end. And I think it's interesting to see different interpretations, of stories like that. But having said that, I don't feel like anything was elevated past even, the previous movie. I don't know. I just don't feel like the efforts were put in the right places in this movie. Like I think the story stuff, there's some changes, and that's interesting that there was an attempt there. But at the same time, I think it failed for me on the relationships. Like I did not think the family felt like both the husband and wife. I'm like, why would you ever marry either one of these people? Like they just felt so bland. Yeah. And like, I would never want, like the mom was so somber the entire time. And if people are somber, they're somber all the time in horror films. That doesn't make things more scary. You know what I mean? And they tried to layer in the kind of the tragedy of her and Zelda and stuff. And it was okay. But, I'd never really felt connected with any of it. And the deaths that take place in the movie, I never really felt the connection like I did with the original film. Like I think just the human connections and the relationships in the film did not work, and I think that's what like this sort of story is based on, because it's not just a zombie film. It is about bringing loved one back to death because you can't handle the grieving process and all that. And I think and I think not having those relationships be strong, it deflates all of that.
Once something we had talked about with us is watching that movie, whether you liked it or not. I could have enjoyed watching just that family have an entire movie where nothing serious occurred and it was just their interrelationships. Like, I could have been fine with that.
It was a stark contrast to those two movies.
Yeah, so with this movie, I don't really feel that as much because I do think that everybody did a pretty good job. Mm-hmm. I just think that a lot of the material, so Amy Simons was Rachel, Jason Clarke was Lewis, I guess it's Jate Lawrence was Ellie. So I thought everybody did a good job, and I thought they did a much better sketching out, like, Ellie's character in this movie than they did in the original films. Because I felt like in the original film, it's more of just like, if there's children in peril, it's like the fact that they're children makes you care. Yeah. As opposed to this one, the character of Ellie actually is like a character you get to interact with.
She's fleshed out.
Yeah. So you would care, if there's any danger. So and then the character of Gage in the original
looks exactly like the original Gage from. So I wonder if that was something that was done on purpose.
That's what my wife said too.
Because looks just like him. I was like, man, it looks just like him. And the main actor, like, I guess, tried to sound like the main actor from the first one. Because we had just rewatched Pet Sematary a day or two before we were watching this one.
Yeah.
It's like, man, they sound exactly the same.
So, like, the movie overall, I think that it does have a darker tone than the original. Yeah. When everything's said and done. And this isn't a carbon copy. It isn't the exact same execution of the story. It's not like Gus Van Sant's Psycho, where it's a shot-for-shot remake. They do change things up and have some, pretty key differences. That being said, I don't know that it really changes my understanding of that story.
Well, I think, from what I understand, this is more of like the horrors of grief. And in the way that this movie is told, it doesn't really feel that way. Because there's like, when we get into spoilers, there's a couple of scenes, I guess, that kind of work. But to me, it's like, like this and the Babadook are kind of similar in the fact that I think it's just the horrors of grief. And when you don't go after that as much, then the movie ceases to be effective. Because, I think this movie tried to make more like, oh, the undead. It's like, that's not really supposed to be the disturbing part. The disturbing part is the fact that you're willing to go and do these gross things to bring someone back, and this one didn't really get into that as much or make you feel.
Well, you didn't really understand the because I think a lot of it's like a tragedy because something sad happens and then somebody's pushed to think, well, maybe this time, because like everybody always watch other people. They'll watch other people fail doing something. Like, man, they're crazy to keep trying that. And then the second the other person's gone, it's like, let me see.
Well, it's like on Arrested Development when they're like,
let's, because he suggests that, like,
they should date other people.
That they should have a trial separation and date other people. And it's like, does that work for anyone? It's like, no, they always delude themselves into thinking it will, but it never does. But maybe for us.
Yeah, and that's kind of the premise of this movie, and you never really feel like that because...
And two, part of it is the fact that, Judd gets involved to even tell Lewis about the cemetery stuff doesn't feel as fleshed out to be as...
it's not convincing enough of why he would do that.
Hey, guys, I'm going to take you somewhere, and we're going to climb this really creepy thing. They're going to walk through some weird marshlands. Then we're going to climb some weird stairs. Then we're going to dig at some really hard dirt. And I'm not going to tell you why. And you're just going to do it.
Which even design-wise on the Pet Sematary and all the burial grounds, like, from my memory, it's been a little while since I watched the original. But from my memory, I like the design and everything in the original more. This just... And maybe it was my theater, but it just felt very dark. And it's like... It just didn't seem interesting.
Well, from looking at all. It almost seemed as like... We're going to have some spooky sounds and some fog.
Exactly. The
scary.
other one felt like someplace you could find behind an old country house. The old Pet Cemetery did. And I love that about it.
The problem I got with this one is it's like, this is, I assume, 2019. And all of America's been explored. This wouldn't happen. People would know about it. And they'd be doing documentaries on it. And there'd be like History Channel TV shows. And I didn't care for that.
But... so taking that element out, because if you do that, then nothing really goes undiscovered. But I
think there's plenty of undiscovered
because
in America.
if the idea was the property they purchased was like 40 plus acres, there is a lot of stuff on that you might not be aware of.
That was me. I'm like, he doesn't know how much property he bought
or where the property line is.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we were talking about in the movies. I knew my wife was like, "Your dad would have walked that property line." I'm like, "Yeah, my dad would have been obsessed."
I guess the one thing though is if they're from Boston, they theoretically could I don't know anything about Boston, so whatever. But like, I guess they could have lived in like a house like I have, where I have a third of an acre.
Yeah, but they couldn't find a house without 40 acres.
Yeah, they just buy this house and they're like, "We're city slickers," and then
they could have so if he was relocating to the university, they could have asked like, "Oh, do you have any leads on property?" Or they could have had, because like some places do have relocation packages or people that work for the company.
Yeah,
so they could have been like, "Okay, we found this beautiful blah 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 style home that sits on 40 plus acres and it's this amount," and then they just looked at it like, "Okay, we'll take it."
Yeah.
Like, or maybe it didn't say too, like if they owned it or if it was a lease.
I'm gonna assume that they purchased it because he's a doctor. He make money.
But regardless, like taking out some of those logical concerns,
I don't really have a concern with that because I just think it was somebody who's just like very city oriented. Maybe lived in an apartment before, or lived in a smaller house. Like that's just something that doesn't even. They've never lived in the country. They're not really going to care as much about.
There was just so many small moments that didn't feel like. There was just there's so much stuff in there that didn't feel like this was like a real family in a real world. You know what I mean? Like that's what it was. It just felt like we were watching these people put on a stage play, a version of this movie.
Well, where it's we're a nuclear family.
We got the major, points of it, but none of the emotion.
Well, like some of the stuff, like if it wasn't an actor who was likable that we were aware of, John Lithgow playing the role of Judd as written for this iteration, I think it would have fallen a lot differently and been even less convincing.
Yeah, John Lithgow being in that role.
Oh yeah,
because I liked his performance. I just think that they didn't really give enough time because. Like in the book between Lewis and Judd, it's more of like a surrogate, like father-son situation. And in this one, it felt more like, your neighbor that could be your occasional drinking buddy type situation.
Like, he's also creeped out by him a little bit.
Yeah, I have two neighbors, and one of them, they're both older, and one of them is like a retired professor, and me and him talk occasionally. But then the other one, he's like retired from the Navy in Churchill Downs and stuff, and we talk all the time. So you have like these real life relationships with your neighbors. You're like, that's not how that feels. Like it didn't feel like it. Kind of felt like the person that you occasionally see out when you're like taking your trash. You're like, hey, how's it going? Yeah. And you kind of had to do these forced conversations where it should have been more like, hey man, we got some extra food. Come over, hang out.
Yeah. In 2019, it does play much differently to watch a man kind of. Stalk a child alone in the woods and then talk to them. That does play differently now.
Yeah, because the way that he did it in this movie was more. I don't know if it was just because he can usually be charismatic. I think it's because they had his character so
he didn't seem warm in this film.
Yeah, so like if it was the normal warm version of him, it'd probably be differently. But when he's just like kind of the weird country, I don't know. It didn't. It came off creepy a little bit. Yeah, it wasn't like you're like, I'm glad he was around to help her. It's kind of like, what are you doing out here?
Yeah, so but like overall, like I said, like the performances are good. I just think that the material, because like Rachel, that character, she was in a perpetual state of like PTSD almost from like childhood, and I understand that, and especially if you're in a house that may be amping up that factor and on its own.
But the thing that didn't make any sense though is that house was not similar to their. Like there's nothing there that like, and maybe I'm wrong, but there didn't seem to be anything in that house to trigger those feelings. So it's like that didn't really work. And
she needed to get out of the house and get a job.
Yeah,
she was just in her head too much.
Yeah, and like something else too is like in the original there was some foreshadowing, but then there were some close calls, and with some certain things. And in this one, there was like one moment of foreshadowing, and then that was it. So I'm thinking too, like. The villain of the movie is the road, obviously, and in this one, like the villain was not the road. You know what I'm saying? Because like it was just kind of like a unforgiving entity, and it didn't really feel like this in this one.
Because
there was a couple,
but it wasn't like
it built up the threat.
But there was no like.
Well, moment, I mean, I think too, though, just part of it is, like even using the cemetery once is, could have kicked a lot of those events into motion and caused those things to happen.
Yeah, everything.
Then I just felt like there wasn't as much of a decision point as there should have been for that initial usage of it. It didn't feel like there was enough disclosure or kind of build up to really earn that. So, because when you look back at it, like, I'll save some of this stuff for spoilers, but yes, I mean, I think coming out of the movie, though, this is a darker in tone movie than the original, really. And it's, something, I was trying to think of, like, what's an ending, or not an ending, but, like, what's a movie where I came out of it and, like, had a similar feel? And I would say I almost felt like Stephen King's The Mist, like, kind of, like, left me on a similar note, but the huge difference was The Mist was a completely different type of movie, leading up to its more dour conclusion. It was a movie that had, some action and excitement and kind of visual wonder and all built in.
Like a Half-Life movie.
As opposed to with this new Pet Sematary, it was mostly just kind of like a quiet endeavor. And there weren't really, that I can remember, any jump scares in it. Not that I want jump scares.
I think there was some.
There was some, and we'll say that for spoilers. But
honestly, I started dozing off at one point, and a couple of them woke me up because I heard like there's like headlights when he's like, I don't know, sees them in the doorway. I woke up and just saw some headlights in the doorway because he was like visualizing it or something. This is before I think anything even happens, but.
There's a scene with dirty feet in the bed, and I just watched Wayne's World 2, and he's walking through the desert, and he wakes up in the morning, and there's like sand all over his feet. He's like, and it's just funny watching that. And he's like, he's all scared, but like Wayne's just like, awesome,
because that was too, wasn't the, if I remember correctly, like the dirt in the bed thing was like in the original movie in the book. So it's just one of those things where I think that this new one, I don't think it really says anything that much differently.
It doesn't really say much anything.
Because, like, the update in technology between 1989 and now doesn't really play a role whatsoever.
To be fair, with the exception of one time he's on his cell phone in a car, this very well could have been set at any time.
Well, he does a slight bit of Googling.
Yeah, I'm saying, but that could even be like, that could be 1999.
That scene could have played out the exact same if he went to the library.
Yeah, so I'm saying, like, outside of that, like, technology really is a non-factor in this.
And the family dynamics aren't significantly different. It's still mother, father, 2 children. There's really no other major deviations from the source material. I think that the motivation for the movie would have seen the success that it had, and then the success that Gerald's Game and some of the other Stephen King adaptations have had, and saying, well, Pet Sematary is a really beloved property. Let's take another crack at that and see if we can do something different. And it felt like they made plot point differences more so than like changing how it felt.
Yeah. There was no thematic changes like, we're walking away with something, you know what I mean? Something else to take away from this. There was nothing else to take away from it other than, like you said, a change in some of the plots.
So I guess
there's also a problematic stereotype in this film too that is just brought up, and I'll go into that in spoilers. I mean, it's not really a big spoiler, but I'll just talk about that later.
Yeah, so now I can, I guess, give our score before we move into spoiler discussion. So looking at this on IMDb, the user scores was a 6.3 out of 10, and the Metacritic was 58. And I don't really think that's too far off base. Like a 5 to 6 to me. In terms of like execution, like it was a well shot movie. And
I didn't think it did anything visually for me. Like it just felt like they were going through the motion. You know what I mean? It didn't feel like there was any specific intent on a lot of the direction of even the camera work and stuff. It was just, hey, let's just make it a little shaky, and not that it was bad, but it didn't strike you or do anything to tell a story better.
Yeah, I wanted it to look like they were one of those vibrating recliners and they're trying to film it. It's just shaking.
Yes, I mean, but the major difference I would say between say this one and the original one. So if you're a 17-year-old that's never seen the original Pet Sematary, the original one has some elements that don't hold up very well in terms of the visuals. Like with Gage in that one, like some of the stuff in that doesn't hold up very well.
They throw it on the stairs. Yeah,
so there's stuff that wouldn't look as good, and what I think to some people would kind of pull them out of the experience completely. This one doesn't really have that.
But this one never even pulls you into the experience.
There's nothing. That's the problem. There's nothing in it that I think would elicit laughter like there may be for a modern audience from the original. No. But at the same time, like you said, there's not the emotional investment in some of this stuff to kind of overlook those elements to begin with. It's, technically proficient and has like good, special effects and gore and stuff, but there's nothing spectacular about it, and nothing that sticks out to me as like a visual I remember.
This is a competently made movie, but it's kind of like it's competently made. There's nothing wrong with it, but to me, it was very uninspired.
Yeah.
And so I'm going 3 out of 10 because, like, I don't I can't talk specifically love the original or the book. Like, I don't have a long, like, where I read the book and I watched the movie and it just holds a special place to me. But it's just like when you go and watch it, it's just like, to me, it's like I don't understand why, because like other than a cash grab, just because Stephen King is Stephen King and a lot of those things draw people in and money. There's nothing in this movie watching like that's why they remade it. So to me, it's just like it's uninspired.
Because at least with like when you look back to like the Evil Dead remake, they gender swapped the lead and changed some of the elements up and did things a little bit differently.
This was, I think, what other remake were we talking about? Oh, It. Okay, so there's definitely, and It was a TV series, but definitely way under It, way under.
Oh, yeah.
But I think still above the Poltergeist remake.
Oh my God! Yeah. I mean anything is, but it just
not a high bar
because the Poltergeist it was at the Poltergeist remake. Like their one jump scare was a squirrel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's no, to me I think it's a different level from that because it is competently executed.
Yeah, it was a totally fun watch. I felt like it, but it wasn't.
I don't think that kids are going to come away seeing this one on a first date and and from like when they're 17 years old and have the same affinity for it 15 years later that people have for Pet Sematary.
Yeah,
I mean it's
the original.
On the base level, it's a very cool premise and it's a very cool story, but I would. There are some things just visually, maybe with the other one, that may be hard for certain audiences to get over. I get that, but I would almost just say, hey, just check out that original one. But I also don't want to ever turn anybody away if like, just don't see this.
No, I'm not going to say
don't see while I was sitting in theaters, I was like, aside from the podcast, I would like to just be watching Us again. You know what I mean right now?
Because like out of South by Southwest, it did have a lot of really positive buzz that had me excited for it. But I think
it was funny because I was listening to a podcast that had, what's his name? The Jim Bob or it's something. The guy
Joe Bob Briggs.
And he was talking about all those festivals. And he's like, I kind of agree with him on this, even though I don't go to him, obviously. But he's like, those people just go there to, like, they're not really fans of horror a lot of the times. They're just people that are general movie fans. So you get this, like, all these buzz where they want people to like these movies, and they come out talking positively about them. And then the general horror fan audience watches it. And there's not that connection there.
Yeah, because so you've seen it done better. Certain things done better, and it's like, well, if
so, I think when you go to these festivals and like you have certain movies like I'm going to pick on Hereditary and Suspiria, or me, like those are like the darlings of the festivals, and you give them to general mass horror fans, they're not going to hit as hard. And this is one of those movies that I kind of feel like it's on the same thing as Suspiria. For me, for the remake, is like...
Well, I think Hereditary is a little bit different beast. But I mean, I think...
I'm saying... I think
what you also, for the record, I love Suspiria.
Yeah. But I think what you're saying...
across the board, this is...
so I think a lot of times with the festival buzz, what happens is... So say you take somebody that never watches college basketball, and they catch like a little bit of like one of the NCAA tournament games. It's like a game that goes down to the buzzer. And they're like, man, that's super exciting. But a basketball fan watches it and they're like, in terms of technical proficiency, this was garbage. Like this was not a well played game. This was a sloppy endeavor that just so happened to end up with the score close at the end, and somebody had to win. So somebody would come away who's like a hardcore fan and be like, yeah, that wasn't like a fun watch. Really, it was just kind of like a pain. And then somebody who's never really watched sports or watched basketball comes away, it's like, oh man, the end of it, there was a 2-point difference, and it was they could have won in the last second. So I think that's too that having these festivals, people that don't really watch horror get elements of it and get really excited, and then they hype it up, and then people who do watch a lot of horror, it's like, well, this is really just this other thing.
But still, though, I think even if they are, I mean, maybe they're just not. You would think they're more critical, but even still on the base level, like the non-horror elements, they don't stand up. That's what I'm saying. Like you would think a general crowd would be able to pick out like. This is a family doesn't work for me. You know what I mean? Like even if they are impressed by all the horror stuff, and maybe that sends it over the edge, and the family stuff can just go by the wayside because it's enough there. But it's weird.
Like this, I think the biggest thing is the family stuff, and that's like where you said where something like Us, different movie, But the family dynamic was so good that you wouldn't watch them in anything. I wouldn't want to watch his family do anything. Like I don't like in Us, you could go watch them go to like what's the most mundane thing ever? Target. Go to Target and shop. That'd still be fun. This family goes to Target.
This family can go to Pet Sematary and I'm falling asleep.
Yeah, like so that's where this movie falls.
But yeah, I think part of it is just like everything was played so somber. Like
so that's the thing. I was thinking
they were acting as if they were escaping a tragedy, but they
when they find like this is like. Okay, the cat dies from looking at the poster. When Judge, says, "Hey, come over here, you got to see this." Like, I was just thinking they could have played this so much differently, and it would have been more fun and even creepy, and you could have still built a relationship between. If you would have made them like both families just off a little bit, because you have to be a little bit off to send you know what I mean, to send a child or whatever to a pet cemetery. You know what I mean? Like, why not make Judge like this kind of creepy weird guy, and the dad a little bit off, and you know what I mean? Like, you could have done something else interesting there. Instead, everybody's just like. As you like to say, Derek, white bread. You know what I mean? They're just like, man, they're just so plain.
Who's the dad?
Aside from being the supposed somber and spooky, but that doesn't do anything. It's nothing.
Casted as Judd is the dad
Judd Nelson.
From Back to the Future.
Crispin Glover.
Yeah, have Crispin Glover be the weird neighbor dad like Judd, and because that would be so different. And that way, like there's still. Probably some likability there.
Yeah, because you'd be like, I like this guy, but man, something's weird, off about him. Yeah,
and that would make it interesting. And then like you said, you have the dad. Like who's
Crispin Glover from Back to the Future?
Look, give me. All right, look. Now this is where this can go off the rails here, but give me Crispin Glover and Nicolas Cage as the 1-2.
Yes, yeah.
Or like, give me a Danny Glover type character that's just sick of everything. Give me something different, and they didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
Or Danny Trejo. Like throw Danny Trejo as an next. It wouldn't really work.
Or let's do Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, it's something. He's just grizzled. And he's like,
he walks up and he starts making racial slurs at the kids, even though it doesn't make any sense. He's like,
and he's got his chair in the road.
It's his character from Gran Torino.
Norma, I'm tired of you. There's nobody in the chair. Norma, and then
because I've started seeing people share a bunch of clips from Gran Torino, like saying like Clint Eastwood's character is an aspirational person. Because like he goes up and like interrupts some people from like messing with a young woman, but then during the entirety of it, he's like using every racial slur you can think of that's not. So it's just like that's weird. It's a weird world we live in now. But like having a character that's like this, just a different
that. Real quick though, that's the thing that a lot of people are finally starting to like. Well, that I see more people calling out because they are so prevalent. It's almost like this, like the racist redemption story. You know what I mean? Where it's like, the person's racist, but they're not all that bad. You know what I mean? Like that's it's one of those stories, and I get why that is.
Why it resonates. I mean, granted, I haven't watched Gran Torino in its entirety since it came out. I only saw the TV edit version, but
all right, we got really off the rails.
Okay, let's go to
your actual score.
Probably a 5 out of 10.
You never gave me
probably a 5 out of 10 because it wasn't like the worst thing ever. But there's so much good stuff out. Like it just goes by the wayside, and I like the attempt at changes. I don't think it makes it better at all. I appreciate that, and at least it was something different on that level to where I wasn't falling asleep through the whole movie. But at the same time, because of the foundations of the story wasn't strong, it didn't end up with any other stronger impact. You know what I mean? It didn't walk away. I prefer the original, even though it's not like even one of my favorite films of all time or anything like that. I just think the original is better, and I think this is a really interesting story. It's I think it is warranted to be remade again at some point. Just because I think you can do. I think there are some more interesting things to explore and maybe some better execution to be had on multiple levels. But yeah, maybe they'll try again in 10 years.
If they do it again, I think they should dump all of the Creed family and just make it a new original story where they're not tied to anything before.
Yeah, but I think that'd probably work a little bit.
But yeah, so now I can move into the spoiler discussion. If you're listening via iTunes, though, real quick, that do us a huge favor, leave a review there. It helps other people find the podcast. We always enjoy seeing feedback on whatever platform you listen to us on, because we do get a lot of good YouTube comments and different things on Facebook and Instagram and stuff. So make sure to let us know if you have some feelings on this movie. And you can find all the stuff we're doing at howtovaystore.com. Find links over social media accounts to Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. I'm forgetting if I'm mentioning anything, but just all that stuff is there. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, because we always post all the topics for the podcast and things like that. If you want to find us specifically on the internet, you can find me on Instagram at the William Caps.
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at MetaWorldDerek.
And I'm at Blevin Sean on Twitter.
All right, so now we'll move into a spoiler discussion for Pet Sematary 2019. All full spoilers from this point out, so you have been warned. We'll discuss all the plot points and major changes that occur between the new movie and the original.
Okay, so real quick about the one thing that popped out, like at the beginning of the movie almost, or very early on. Like, so you guys still haven't watched Horror Noir, have you?
No.
You really need to watch that. I've watched it twice so far. Go watch that as soon as you can on Shudder. It is so good. Again, like I said, it starts out and it's kind of some of the stuff you're maybe a little questionable because you're like, really? Is that like, are there connections there? And I take these people from their word because it's based on a book, very well researched, you know what I mean? But once you get past that, everything, you're like, oh yes, I've seen these things a million times. I understand. So the kid that gets hit by the car, is he hit by a car in the film?
Victor Pascal, yes.
Yeah.
He comes and was he black in the original?
No, in the original, he's just a white guy.
Okay, yeah. So, he comes and warns, like, the ground is sour and all that. This essentially pretty much falls in the trope that they talk about in the film. And there's like a Wikipedia page for it, too, because I just want to make sure I was calling it the proper title. I figured I was, but it's The Magical Negro. And here's the synopsis, or here's the description. In this... Magical Negro is a supporting stock character who comes to the aid of white protagonists in a film. Magical Negro characters who often possess special insight or mystical powers have long been a tradition in American fiction. That's exactly what he is in this film. He's just there to assist the white. He dies. He's dead right away, basically.
And two, I think that like part of that is they took an existing character and just changed who the actor was portraying it. So it may have been just a little bit of colorblind casting. They may have not made a conscious decision to say, oh, we're going to specifically do this. It may just be like, oh, for this role, we're casting for 18 to 28-year-old men who are college age looking. And that was the only specification.
And there's other podcasts I've been listening to recently, and they were talking about like, hey, when you do cast a black actor, know the connotations that come with that as well. You know what I mean?
Like some responsibility to actually think about.
It's the same with Night of the Living Dead. Like he didn't know, and he was later told, George Romero was like, what the significance was because he didn't even realize the impact that it was. And you have to know, what each person brings to the table when you're casting every character, a female, a male. You know what I mean? Different nationalities, like what connotation you're bringing to that or whatever. This is a trope that was pointed out in the book before the documentary and stuff. Like it has a Wikipedia article. Like I think Spike Lee made it, popularized it in 2001. This is not a new thing people are talking about. It just seems like an ignorance that it's like, and I understand if like, oh, whatever. It's just, but it's like, it is a trope that is a, you know what I mean? It's not a positive thing.
It's a double-edged sword because you do have there's not enough inclusion and diversity when it comes to casting for Hollywood films. But then sometimes when they do make a casting change, they do need to think about the implications of what they've done a little bit and make sure that it all gels. And that's not saying like don't, cast more diversely. It's just saying maybe sometimes once you have made a change, just think through the implications of,
this exactly falls into that stereotype though. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm just saying like, oh, there's like, this is exactly that stereotype. What's funny is I don't... how many, like Scatman Crothers from The Shining, they talk about that's a huge one. Because he basically just shows up and gets killed. Like he's all there to help that. I've heard some people complaining like, you mean he hopped on a plane to help that little white boy he had just met and then gets killed right away? Like
So like, and two, I haven't seen that criticism thrown at the movie very much.
I haven't seen it at all, but I just noticed as soon as I watched it, I'm like, oh, that is exactly that trope, that stereotype that gets.
Especially in horror, especially mainstream horror, has had, unfortunately, circumstances where they don't have the greatest track record of how they handle a lot of stuff.
No.
But even
and like... most of it is ignorance. It's none of it, I don't see none of it, but you would assume like 85% of it is not any intentional racism or at all. It's just complete ignorance. And that's why I'm like, this horror noir doc hopefully is a great thing for a lot of filmmakers. Like, hey, just bring some sort of awareness because you are all coming in from your own perspective and your own experiences in life, which are us as white guys. You know what I mean? Like, and you can't even see like what those other things are, and that's what this doc is so great, and it's so fascinating. Even if you're not making films, it's so fascinating to see the other perspectives, and then them talk about even the films they love, what's problematic about it. You know what I mean? Like Candyman. So that's so so many issues with that. Even though it's like they also talked about, how great it was having a black horror villain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, having Tony Todd,
Yeah, they loved that. They loved seeing themselves on screen like that. That's
just
the
more
words
representation.
they were saying in the documentary. So it's very, hopefully more filmmakers will watch that, because it's just funny, like seeing that right away. Like I'm starting to spot stuff more and more now.
And two, because like I said,
continue to repeat.
And two, that was previously a character in the original novel. I don't remember if it specified what his race was and his appearance, beyond just his name and stuff, and like what had happened to him. But in the original movie, like Derek said, it was just, a white guy.
He was a white guy with a bad chili bow haircut and
yes, that's right. I remember. Yeah, I remember now. Yeah.
So that's something where, like you said, they probably literally I would not be, because I know I've seen a lot of casting notices for like commercials or like film projects and stuff that have looked for people locally, and a lot of times it won't specify a nationality, or like it'll specify gender and age range and like the look they're going for, but not a specific race or ethnic identity within that. So, they'll say we're looking for people that can play country town folk who are between the ages of 25 and 45, or just general things like that.
Yeah.
But getting to the movie itself. So if you've seen the trailer, or seen the movie, obviously the big switch, and one that I actually thought worked, was instead of having it be Gage, the young toddler, the 2-year-old who gets hit by the truck and killed, instead it was Ellie, their daughter, who was what was she turning, 10 or 9? So older, a little bit, taller. And I did think in terms of just like the mechanics of it, that worked better, because you got more time spent with her to get a little bit more of a character arc a little bit. And you got a little bit more of a sense of who she was, versus a 2-year-old. No matter how much you show, they're not going to have a ton of personality, because at 2 years old, they're not sitting there giving like their thoughts and opinions on stuff in a way that so I thought that element worked, and it made more sense that she was able to kill people.
Well, and two, she was aware of she slowly became aware of what had happened, and that was more interesting too. Or it was more interesting. It was than Gage in the original, but also I still prefer the original. I don't know. I felt more sympathy for him even in the original, even though he wasn't really like a fleshed out character. Yeah. Just something about it being like a young child that young. For some whatever reason, I felt more sympathy, and maybe it's just the way it was all presented.
And then too, though, you also have a child that's probably around that age.
Yeah. So, but even before I saw the movie,
you still felt.
So when I saw the original, I did not have a child from what I remember, and
you didn't have a child from what you remember.
Yeah. No, I think last time I watched it, I don't know, but
we covered it on the podcast.
Yeah, but I watched it a long time before that too, and I felt so much more like, oh man, this is terrible. Like this actually feels dark. Where this, I have a child now, and I'm like, this didn't do as much for me as the original did. You know what I mean?
I think
I don't know what it was.
I think thematically, just what you're watching, because it's something my wife talked about last night, because she's a huge fan of the original and the book and the movie.
What did she think about this?
Oh, she hated it.
Yeah,
she couldn't stand it.
I saw her on Facebook. She gave it a 1 out of 10.
Yeah, she hated it because, again, she's somebody who's read the book and watched, because she read the book before she watching the movie. So that's her favorite Stephen King book, because she's read it a lot. Anyway, and for her, me and her kind of talking, I was like, look, I think thematically, just for what you're watching on screen, it works better to have a 9-year-old run around than have a 2-year-old, because the 9-year-old is able to process okay, I remember my birthday, I remember church on the street, then I don't remember anything.
Yeah, that was an interesting element.
And then she realizes she's dead.
And then that throughout those points, that made more sense, because they even had a discussion about life and death with her earlier in the film. Mm-hmm. So for that scene where the dad's giving her a bath, and she's kind of putting everything together, and he's getting all the tangles out of her hair, and then he sees the staples in the back of her head, that worked. Mm-hmm. That was really good. But then and then he lays in bed with her, and then she, where she's just again kind of finding out that she's dead. All that was good. And then from after that, though, to me it just kind of was a miss, because at that point, once you get to where she goes and kills Judd and starts killing everybody, then you could have just had Gage do it. But I think my biggest issue is that, and this is probably a lot of people's biggest issue, is that in the original and even in the book, the dad is the last one left, and Gage kills the mom, and then Judd, and he buries the mom.
Well, and
Ellie is not even there. She's at the parents' house,
and there's the tension built up between Lewis and Rachel's parents.
Yeah, and that was like
which I like.
They
so that was jettisoned.
Yeah,
completely.
they sort of hinted at it,
but they showed nothing. If you hadn't watched the original movie or read the book, you wouldn't have known.
Yeah, because like the dad gave him some looks, but that was it. Like there was, but outside of that, there was no tension between the parents. And I think for me, the moments in the movie that derive the most horror or feelings of dread were the wife's reflections of Zelda. And I know like that was something that I remember the most out of the original too, is like the moments where you see Zelda. But I just think that they really went on that really heavy in this movie. And it's like, I have different feelings about that too, because like now we live in a world where, you're kind of
physical disabilities.
You're vilifying somebody that has a physical disability. And I understand as a kid that could be terrifying because you're looking at it through a kid's eyes and somebody doesn't really process it as well. But then you've just made a monster out of somebody who had a physical disability and whatever. And it's like,
And it wasn't scary. And it's not like they even made scary. It. Not even like they made it like, they made it really crazy. No,
but they went really heavy-handed in it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other stuff, they didn't go as heavy-handed in it because they set these scares up and they had a lot of moments where like she would hear Zelda go, and it's like you went really hard on that. But then the actual thematic parts you're supposed to hit, you didn't. Like there was no real like outside of, for me, the initial the daughter coming back home after he buried her, like, and just that little process. And then when the mom and Gage came home and they saw her, that was good. But then they just kind of dumped all that, and it never really.
So instead of her getting back, so instead of Rachel taking Gage and getting back in the car and leaving, she goes upstairs and locks the door.
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense.
That was more of kind of movie logic, just to kind of keep the story moving, because otherwise the movie ends at that point, or it becomes a vastly different movie where they just leave and then Lewis has to deal with the daughter. I mean, because like some people are saying that a big difference was in the like the original and the book or whatever. Lewis having to kill Gage again. Like showed his remorse for the action.
Yeah, I mean that's so great in the original.
And then
Gage is like, it's not fair. This isn't fair because he's using his strength and he gives him
because he gives him like the drugs or whatever. And then like since his wife is dead, he thinks, well, maybe this time, since this is happening maybe since this is happening immediately afterwards, it'll be different.
Yeah.
And then just resigns himself to whatever happens. I mean, like, so that is like
it leaves the end ambiguous because like,
but what happened.
Because I think in the movie, I think like she comes in and it just kind of ends. Even the book, like she just shows up, but you kind of know what happens.
So this version,
I think it said the movie because I was trying to remember the movie. I think she walks in and grabs a knife, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So then this version, a big difference is that Lewis doesn't kill Ellie. Ellie and kills Rachel and then takes her to the pet cemetery and then buries her, and then when Lewis is fighting with her, Rachel comes back and then kills him, and they take him to the pet cemetery and bury him, and then all three of them come back.
They burn Judd's house.
Which
doesn't make any sense because Ellie even talked about burying him in the pet cemetery, so they didn't do that. They just burned him. And then, Gage, it's implied they probably kill him and bury him, but they didn't show it.
Yeah.
So it's like you have this undead family, and it's like, well, what's their motivation now? Are they just going to continue to kill everybody in the town and bury him in the pet cemetery? Something, too, that we were kind of talking about with Ellie that would have been for me would have been interesting. Is this one to add a little bit more lore to the Indian burial ground spot? Because in the original,
so it did show like a glimpse of like a Wendigo type creature and hinted at that backstory, which was interesting.
What I think would have worked, maybe for me, maybe I'm wrong, is like when she first showed up, they have a mirror shot of her like in the mirror, and it was a little girl. It was actually her. But then like as she kind of realizes what's going on and all the things happen, you do something else to separate. Like, okay, this is no longer her. You see something that lets you know like. She's
the other thing that it didn't do was in the original film and like the book or whatever, Judd explains to Lewis about what happened the last time a person was buried in the cemetery.
That's what I was just trying to look at. Bill Baderman. Yeah, like I think that was so good.
They reference it because they talk about the Vietnam veteran.
Yeah, they flash it up or something.
Yeah, I think in the original was World War II.
So I think, and two, the other thing the movie did is it had a bunch of Easter eggs or callbacks to the original film because it has like when Judd's walking through the house and there's under the bed, he kicks the bed away.
Yeah,
and then he gets stabbed. And then he gets stabbed through like the tendon or the Achilles.
Well, it still happened in the original. It just Gage got him under the bed, and that's why he kicked the bed. And
they were playing on your knowledge of the original.
Yes,
they waiting for it.
And then like the whole like switcheroo with Gage and Ellie with the truck. they played that, but the trailer spoiled that twist. I mean, so I don't know if people would have been like mouth agape if they didn't know that when they saw it, but like,
here's the thing though. I already knew there was a twist because people were talking about it so much. You know what I mean? So even though I didn't know, I was like, oh, okay, so that's what it is. Like I didn't really care. You know what I mean?
But then, like, I honestly think that change worked for the better for the storytelling elements. You know, because honestly, a toddler dummy getting thrown down the stairs or something.
Yeah, but man, when he had to put his, when he's like trying to euthanize his toddler in the original, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that just is so strong.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have played out the moment with Ellie very similarly. Yeah. And it would have been even, I think, more impactful because you actually have more of like a defined arc for her.
Yeah, I think that's where this movie to me falls completely flat. Well, too, because like Sean was saying, that's what this movie's about. It's about grief and about dealing with death and all this stuff. And then like that's kind of where the movie and the book work. And then you get to that and you're like, you know what, guys? We're not going to do that. We're just going to do something completely different. And then they kind of made this more like Pet Sematary 2. Because remember in Pet Sematary 2, like they killed the cop and then the cop kept burying people in the bear. And it's like this to me felt more like the second one, which wasn't nearly as good.
The other thing too that they didn't, because I've seen a few complaints. I'm like, so the inciting incident that really kicks everything from this story into gear is after Church dies and Judd takes Lewis to the Indian burial ground or the Native American burial ground. And that's really where the entire, because like somebody was saying, maybe them even burying Church there to begin with caused like those forces to kind of intercede and kind of make things happen so that they would go back again and bury things. So if they hadn't done that, then nothing may have happened. But in this movie, you don't really get a relationship built up where it seems like Ellie would really be devastated that the cat Church was dead. Mm-hmm. Enough so that they would feel the need to tempt fate with this. So, and two, like the Judd relationship, he's like, oh, she's the first thing that's brought light to my life and blah, blah, blah. But it didn't really show that. It's just him saying it.
Now, in the book, his wife Norma was still alive when the family moved in.
Yeah.
And then she dies like right before Church dies. So I guess all that makes him decide to bury Church. So there's a lot of stuff I don't really get why they removed it. And like in this one is implied that he buried Norma in the burial ground, then had to kill her or something when she came back. So there's a lot of stuff that they did that I don't know why they didn't show it, because I think, again, like one of the better scenes from the original was that soldier coming back home and being different and then like burn the house.
That was
but then not doing that, because even like, well, I don't want to get into spoilers for another TV show, but there's another TV show we watch that like kind of has a similar moment, kind of like The Monkey's Paw, and it's like that is effective. But they didn't do that.
Well, the other thing, too, that's effective is, from like the book or whatever, when somebody came back, a person came back, they knew things that no one should be able to know. Because he was talking about, was it like Judd seeing a prostitute or something? And then at one point they said something like Judd's wife cheating on him with his friends or something. So like that element was completely glossed over in this. Yeah. And because the idea is they come back not really as the person they were, but a demon that has vague access to their memories or something maybe. I mean, it's not really clear, but at least that's like an interesting idea of what you bring back is really just a demon that's taking over that body that has access to memories to know what happened in their life and then is able to know all kinds of other stuff that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
But like, I think like the most effective moment that caused people to cringe in the theater where I was at was the stuff with Rachel when she was getting the spinal bifida stuff. Like,
that's what I'm saying. That's my problem.
Zelda.
That's my problem in the movie is like, so the scariest moment is when
a hallucination
of somebody with a physical disability. And that's,
I think that part of it though kind of goes into body horror, because her body was transforming.
Yeah, it definitely does.
So that was a little bit okay, but it was based on the fact that her, her sister was.
But I think just overall for me that this movie didn't.
Yeah. So the thing I kept thinking about too was like, again, the wife and the, even the dad, like they were just arguing before anything bad happened, talking about death. Like they never felt like, why would these people even be together?
Well, and it didn't feel like a natural conversation, because when you're in a relationship with someone, there are things that come up that are an argument, that are a discussion, but that between them felt like an argument.
Well, too, I'm like, really? They've never had this conversation before about the afterlife. You know what I mean? Like they've never seriously talked about it. Like what? How old is their daughter in like 10 years? You know what I mean? Like
and how long
I feel like that's something people talk about a lot, you know, even just friends, you know? But so another thing too, like something that the other film did so well was they showed how happy the family was, you know, going on picnics. Like it was like, oh, and that way when the tragedy happens, you can show the change and the toll it has taken on him and why he was driven to do that. You know what I mean? Like this, like, you know, we know people who've lost a kid.
Sorry.
It just like this new version felt like they were trying as a last gasp to salvage their marriage almost.
Yeah,
maybe.
Versus because it didn't feel like there was the warmness there and like the because there was like an old episode of The Office. One of the characters, Erin, that's played by Ellie Kemper, like she was dating this guy that was into like horror films and stuff. She's like, and she hated horror films. She's like, I really love the beginning parts where everybody's lives are perfect. I don't care so much for when everybody dies. So like this movie really didn't even have the part where it seemed like things are perfect or they were all, aside from having affection for their daughter and then their son just kind of being there.
And I think,
well, it's just like the family didn't feel like you couldn't see how hard the family was wrecked by this tragedy because, it's like they just didn't, they almost seemed like somewhat the same. And that was the thing with it. Like there was no like, oh my God, Heredity leans on the devastation. And you know what I mean? And the destruction of it. And it does that well, whether or not you like the movie. I think it does that stuff pretty well.
It does.
And I've, we know people who've lost kids and being with their parents, like knowing how I've seen them change. You know what I mean? And this film, I didn't feel like you really saw them change. And it just so lessens the impact of the events taking place.
It moved pretty quickly once
again, it feels like a Spark Notes version of.
But again, like I think that the biggest enemy in the original film was the road, and then I think when you had the close call where he caught Gage the first time before he got hit, that lets you know, like, okay, now you have to pay attention all the times. And then they had the kite, and he wasn't paying attention. He went out and got hit, and then the grief was on the dad because he knew better. And he knew it was his fault because he did not watch his kid.
And the parents, Rachel's parents blamed him.
Because, they lived next to that road. He wasn't paying attention. This one is like, there wasn't really any of that. I guess they could have gotten to, well, if he hadn't done that with the cat.
No, I think that's exactly the point. And I think that tries to drive home the theme of like, you know what I mean? He is the sole reason because they buried that cat. You know what I mean? Like, I think that ties the cemetery into it even more. Whether or not you think it works that well, but I think
they never really like dive into that
because
I mean he does specifically say if I've never buried the cat, she would never be dead.
I never buried the cat,
and that's why he was like kind of and Judge was upset too because he knows that all led to there.
Yeah.
I don't think they executed it very well, but I see why they did it.
Yeah, and then Lewis. Giving Judd, drugging him.
That
was kind of weird.
I was like, is he killing him? Like,
yeah, it's like, I mean, Judd didn't seem like he may have like wanted to come over and talk to him. It didn't seem like he was going to physically restrain him or anything.
Yeah, or could have just got him drunk normally and then just went and did what he wanted to do.
But yeah, so I mean, just a lot of this stuff. There weren't any like standout moments where you come away from it like, whether or not I like the movie, because like Suspiria, even if you hated Suspiria, there were some moments you can come away and talk about to people and say like, man, like this specific sequence had some pretty gruesome stuff in it
and stuff you haven't seen.
As opposed to this movie, I don't know that you really come away saying that.
There's nothing in this movie, because we talk about this a lot, like movies that I found to be bad, and it's like, well, at least it had this.
Yeah.
And this doesn't have anything, like in 2 weeks from now, I won't remember anything about this.
Honestly, that night, I was like, oh, wait, I forgot I watched Pet Sematary today. You know what I mean? Like that night.
And like even when they killed Ellie, like when they killed Gage in the original, you see like a little bloody shoe falling, and it was like let you know like it was horrible.
It was
And this one, Ellie's just like laying in the field dead, and it's like no, that probably
again that thing. So much of this film just doesn't feel like specifically shot. You know what I mean? It just feels like they just kind of
or like what they could have done too is go full on monkey's paw for anybody who's read that story, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it. Son gets killed in a horrible accident at work. They wish him to come back, but he comes back in the state in which he was murdered. He died, and he's like horrific. So if they had done something with Ellie where she was like horrifically killed and had these horrible injuries, but he went in anyway, and then she comes back and is dealing with that, and you have a little bit of body horror on that element, then that could have been really effective. Like, oh, okay, so like kind of like they almost made her look like Zelda from the injury, and then the mom had to deal with her daughter looking that way, and then you went from that aspect. Okay, that I get that. That's really disturbing. You have this cute little girl, now she's a hideous monster because you buried her in the Indian ground, and she came back, and then she's aware of it.
Well, they kind of did it because her eye went down a little bit.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but like they could have done something where like she got mangled in the accident and she came back like that, and they didn't do that.
Closed casket.
Yeah.
And then he went ahead and did it anyway, and now here he is. Just imagine all that with a highly deformed person, and it gets way worse. But they didn't do that, so I just.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was to keep it palatable enough.
Didn't go hard enough on this.
Because, like you said, like her eye slightly drooping a little bit was kind of off-putting, but it wasn't scary or creepy.
It's like
because there wasn't a moment of like her realizing like, oh, I look gross now.
Yeah,
and
not that that's gross, but she wasn't gross.
I mean, what Derek was saying, like there was more grotesque injuries, and she was like, oh, my arm is shredded.
And then like the mom, has PTSD from Zelda. She comes home and sees that. And then it's like, okay.
Another funny thing and related to Us, so the end of Us, this is like super they just show somebody dancing and it's set to that amazing song that was scored for the film. But originally, in this film, it has her dancing to Sugar Plum Fairies or something from Nutcracker.
Yeah.
Originally, Peele was going to use a song from the Nutcracker in his film too. So it was just funny. Like if he would have done that song from the Nutcracker, it was like 2 or 3 weeks apart. Yeah. Two films would have had dancing little girls with music from the Nutcracker. But, so he dodged that. To not have comparisons.
This movie did have a cover of the Pet Sematary song that the Ramones originally made.
It's like whatever.
Do that. Don't disrespect it. Just use the Ramones version.
Yeah, I don't see why you would.
Why do you have to go
it?
have somebody else do something? Like I'm not a purist. I'm not this or that. But when you have the Ramones and it was a good song and you're going to give me
play it too,
just play the damn.
But
song.
I think that like there's a weird middle ground where they had a bunch of references and throwbacks to the original while trying to do something different.
I feel like they watched the original a bunch.
But I know it's like the Evil Dead remake did that. But then it went like a lot further and changed. I don't know. There's like a line where sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Well, too, I don't know how people feel because sometimes I'm like, dude, if I was remaking a film, would I be like, I don't want to piss off Stephen King because he hates The Shining, which is one of the greatest horror films of all time.
Whether Stephen King, you made a good movie.
Yeah, whether or not he wasn't true to the original vision. I totally get that, but. Definitely a beloved film that is more memorable than, at least half the Stephen King films. And for me, like my favorite Stephen King movie, you know what I mean? Like, or a Stephen King horror film, at least. Like what, what do you do? Like, do they feel like their hands are tied somewhat to be like, I can't change too much because I don't know. Anyway, I'm mostly done with it. Anything else you guys want to talk about?
I got nothing.
So that'll wrap up our discussion of Pet Sematary from 2019, the new remake. The next episode, we'll be discussing Night of the Creeps, the Fred Dekker movie that has Tom Atkins in it and is a fun throwback. So that'll be the next episode. So that'll complete and wrap up this episode of the House by Vasor podcast. Thanks for listening.